Good morning, my beautiful babes and babes. I am your resident active advocate, and I'm here today to discuss some low-hanging fruit in the form of Aladdin and racism. I am not a one-issue advocate. I don't want to pretend to be. And today's video, therefore, is going to be about the very racist angles that Aladdin takes, Disney's version anyway. I would also like to do this with Pocahontas, which is the next movie in line. However, I don't want to do it tomorrow. I want to do it on Monday. I would like to take, if you don't mind, the weekend to research. I don't know enough about the Powhatan tribe to be able to speak to what actually happened in real history. Disney did not get that movie historically accurate, and I'm very well aware of that. And therefore, I would like to research the actual story and see what really happened, and to see why that movie is as bad as it is. And I know it's pretty bad. It was my favorite movie growing up. Not anymore. But today, I would like to discuss Aladdin, and I do know enough about this one to be able to discuss it without prior research. In Aladdin, there is a motif or a concept present called Orientalism, all right? I don't know whether this term was first actually coined by the scholar Edward Said. Look him up. His surname is spelled the same way as the word said, so S-A-I-D. Brilliant scholar, but he at least brought the term to prominence. Orientalism is the concept of taking everything that is not, quote, us, in the racial, cultural, linguistic, and religious senses, and making it into the, quote, other, all right? We are not talking here about global West versus global East, all right? We are talking about white, English-speaking, male, heterosexual, heteronormative, Western Europeans versus the rest of the world. That's the idea of, well, quite frankly, and I might get knocked for this, but that is the idea of white supremacy. The concept of Orientalism creates that particular kind of person, quotation marks, as being superior to everyone else in the world, because the, quote, other does not think like us, they do not speak like us, they do not believe like us, they do not act like us. Therefore, they are bad. This especially applies, however, to they do not look like us. Humans, most, are very visually oriented creatures. We judge largely based on what we see. Much of this does come out of the Greco-Roman mythohistory, because in mythology especially, people who were beautiful were portrayed as being morally superior as well to people who were not classically beautiful. You see this in the myth of Eros and Psyche, Eros being the god of love, and Psyche being the goddess of the soul. The Greek word psyche actually means soul. When we commandeered that term for the field of psychology, we made it mean mind. Originally, the word meant soul, okay? So Psyche was the most beautiful princess in the world in this myth, and she was also the most virtuous person in the Greek mythohistory. It's Cupid and Psyche in the Roman mythohistory, but it's exactly the same myth, just with different names. So when it comes to this idea of Western, quote, supremacy, I shouldn't say we, okay? I don't mean we, but white supremacists will see the people that they other as being uglier, as being morally incapable, as being, intellectually incapable. And this is why I stress that this is not based on global West versus global East. If it were, white supremacists would actually have considered the North and South American indigenous to be superior to them because they live and originate further west than the Western Europeans, who invaded the North and South American continents in the 1400s to, well, now, really. I mean, that whole ethos of indigenous, quote, inferiority has never gone away. The last residential, quote, school, I will never use that word without adding the quotation marks, by the way. These were not schools, these were torture chambers. I believe the very last one, at least in North America, closed in 1991. For context, I was alive in 1991, okay? I was born in 1990. So this is not ancient history we're talking about. But in getting back to Aladdin, Orientalism is a prominent theme in this movie, in that the characters who are portrayed as being morally good, okay, if you own this movie, go and look at the box, because you can see what I mean by this, because Aladdin, Jasmine, the Sultan, and the Genie are all portrayed as having much more Western European features, facial features. You know, they have larger, rounder eyes, they have smaller noses, they're very proportional, they have rounder faces. You know, it's supposed to be a visual signal that this is us, this is good. The only difference is that they have darker skin. We do not know where this movie is set, but when it gets to the morally bad characters, they are portrayed oftentimes, and especially in the case of Jafar, as having darker skin, longer, more Asiatic faces, smaller, more narrowed eyes, and longer noses, bigger mouths, you know, the curly beard. These are all very stereotypical representations of not only the visual other, but also the supposed moral other and the supposed moral inferior. So Jafar is not evil because he has these features. He has these features because he is evil. That is basically what the visual representation is pronouncing to us. This character is evil. Just look at how he looks. As compared to Aladdin and Jasmine and the Genie and the Sultan may be ignorant of what's going on, but he's still ultimately morally good. He seems to want the best for his people, even though the vast majority of them are portrayed as living in poverty. So when it comes to the representations in this movie, it's not good. I may also point out to you the fact that the song, the opening number, Arabian Nights, the lyrics as they stand now go, "Well, I come from a land, from a faraway place where the caravan camels roam, where it's hot and immense, no, where it's broad and immense, I believe, and the heat is intense. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home." That was switched, okay? The original lyrics were, "I come from a land, from a faraway place where the caravan camels roam, where they'll cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home." That was switched, not only to make it kid-friendly, but because there was actually an outcry from the Muslim community especially about these lyrics, and understandably so. You see in the movie that they are Muslims. Much of the time, they are swearing by Allah, okay? I might make the point here, by the way, that Allah is just the Arabic word for God. Arabic-speaking Christians and Arabic-speaking Jews also call the Abrahamic God Allah. English speakers use the word God. You know, Hebrews may use, well, they wouldn't say it out loud, it's considered too sacred, but they would use the word Yahweh. Normally, though, Orthodox Jews will call God Adonai, which means Lord, as far as I'm aware. But the problem with this movie is that they are portraying Islam as the bad guy, but they are also combining numerous cultural motifs that go all the way from China to India to Arabia to, you know, all these different aspects of the quote Orient. Remember, The Orient is not itself a place. It is not itself a culture. It is not a singular thing. The Orient is an idea that white Western European males, with all the traits that I listed before, created in order to say to the people back home, look how different these people are from us. Look how uncivilized, quotation marks, they are, as compared to us. We are the good ones. We are the intellectual ones. We don't worship idols. We don't wear these strange clothes. We don't have this rigid caste divide as seen in India, even though, yeah, we do, except that it's based on money, not on family name or on heritage necessarily. It's all just based on money. It might not be outlined in the strict Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Dalit sense, the five castes in India, at least back before Gandhi. But yeah, we have quite a rigid hierarchy here. Much of the Western hierarchy, too, is based on skin color, is based on your family heritage, your family name. For example, I have a very Italian surname. Not more than 100 years ago, Italians in North America were considered third-class citizens, okay? I'm also Irish on my other side. Not more than 100 years ago were Irish considered third-class citizens in North America. So, from the very strictly English-speaking, ethnocentric Western European standpoint here, I would also be considered, if not a racial, at least a cultural inferior on both sides. The thing is, with Orientalism, it is a very wide span of ideas of who can be us as compared to them. I, for example, would be more, quote, us than my best friend. She has Eastern European on one side of her family, and they are not native English speakers. So at least on that side of the family, she would be considered less, quote, us than me. My father's parents were respectively Italian and Dutch, okay? Neither of them, their first language was not English. But they both had to learn English to communicate with one another because she spoke Dutch, he spoke Italian. So that's where that came from. But my dad was born in America. So even though he is of Western European white heritage, he was not considered us until, later in his life when it sort of ceased to be an issue. Because he looks enough like, quote, us to fit in. Right? Even though he has a very Italian surname, as I say. And, that whole idea of how big is the sphere of us, quotation marks, right? It's allowed to be bigger when we consider other cultures that do not look like us, speak like us, believe like us, socialize like us, all these different things. That sphere is allowed to be bigger. But if we completely other and ostracize those other, quote, other cultures, the sphere of what is, quote, us gets ever smaller. And that, in my mind, is the main point of Western white supremacy, especially if you're going to limit it to native English speakers, because those all came from the same island. Native English speakers came most prominently from England. And England is a tiny country on a fairly tiny island. But that's where all the power came from, because they were colonizers of the entire world. Back in Queen Victoria's day, it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, because the British Empire spanned the entire globe. It went from Canada all the way over to India on the other side of the map. Right? They never got China, they never got Japan, so technically it didn't go all the way to the very farthest reaches of the global east. But you could almost quite accurately say the sun never set on the British Empire. Until it did, after the World Wars, and that was a good moment, I think, because it opened the globe up to itself. and, white Western male prominence and rule became less of an issue, which is good. It's still a huge issue, which is bad, but thank you, Internet. We are now more open to one another than we ever have been before. Thank you, globalism, for the same reason. And, as long as we can communicate with one another, we can get rid of these stereotypes that create movies like Aladdin. I almost haven't discussed the movie itself at all, right? But you can see these themes present in the movie. Aladdin and Jasmine, they're the good guys, right? So they look more Western European. Jafar is the bad guy. He looks much more Asiatic. And, it is basically a tale of West versus East in the conception of white supremacists. I am not saying that Walt Disney himself was a white supremacist. I don't know. But that is the ethos out of which this movie came. The original story had nothing to do with that kind of theme. I do believe the original story came actually out of China, not out of Arabia. I'm not going to call it Saudi Arabia, by the way. I know that that's the country's official name at the moment, but that prefix can change depending on what family is in charge of this country. So before that it was called something else, and before that it was called something else, but it was always called Arabia, right? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Arabia, all right? And it was just called Arabia in his time. So I think I'll go with that. Not to get political, by the way. I don't know enough about these conflicts, these like interreligious conflicts, to be able to say what side is quote right, what side is quote wrong. Why I'm not even entirely sure anymore why they don't like each other. The two different sects of Islam, not to mention the Alawites, which are another thing entirely. But that conflict continues to go on, as the conflict between the West and the East, both of those in quotation marks, because as I say, I'm not talking about global West versus global East. That conflict still continues as well. The best I can do is to make content like this in the hopes that we can learn how to communicate with one another and how to shed these stereotypes and how to shed these misunderstandings. If you talk to someone, just talk to someone. Don't generalize about their culture. There's no point in doing that, because they could just as easily do it to you. There's no point. There's no point in racism, because inevitably we all bleed red. Every single person. So if there is but one thing that human beings have in common, is that we all bleed red. So don't go cutting one another. Don't go killing one another. There's no point, because it just reveals that we are all the same in that regard. So I know that this was more of an analysis of Orientalism itself rather than of Aladdin, but that's by far the most prominent theme in the movie. And, the whole thing about the magic genie, that's a theme in Islam. Let's go back to that. That's a theme in Islam. The jinn were a race of created creatures who were, most of them, opposed to the angels. In Islamic lore, the angels do not have free will. They do the will of God, whereas the jinn are on a similar power level to the angels, shall we say, but they do have free will. So they are more powerful than humans, but like humans, they have free will. And in Islamic lore, the angels went to war with the majority of the jinn, who were led by Satan, their conception of Satan, and it did not go well for the jinn. Many of them were enslaved by God and by the angels, and that was considered a victory for God. But God even said to Satan, by the way, we get the word Satan from the Arabic word shaitan, which means the one who whispers, because it's always the little devil voice whispering in your ear that's tempting you off the path, right? God said to Satan, I will give you until the end of days to prove yourself, to prove that, as you claim, these humans will not worship me. But you're making a bet against God. You're going to lose, basically, right? This is Islamic commentary. This is not my commentary. I have friends, I have relatives who are atheists, and they're brilliant people. Another conception that we have is that atheism is a bad thing. No, it's not bad, it's not good. Like, to be an atheist is morally neutral. That's got nothing to do with the kind of person you actually are. The one thing I would ask, regardless of what religion you are, regardless of what culture you are, think, use your head. Don't do as your ancestors did in the name of cultural supremacy and therefore oppression. Don't do that. You know I don't like these top-down structures. If you've been with the channel for a while, you know that. So think for yourself. Use the tools that you have available to you, literature, the internet, me, yay! Think for yourself. Watch the media you consume with discerning eyes. Listen with discerning ears. Be open to one another's perspectives. That's all I'm asking out of this video. Tomorrow, as I say, I would like to take a research day. Didn't mean to rhyme, but there you go. And look into the origins and the history of the Powhatan tribe and to see why Disney got Pocahontas so very wrong. So very wrong. But on Monday, I will be giving you Pocahontas and Racism. So look forward to that. Used to be my favorite movie in the Disney canon, not anymore. I don't know whether I have a favorite now. Maybe Beauty and the Beast. Like I said yesterday, it's a good one. So I'll see y'all on Monday because I take Fridays off for research and I take weekends off for weekends. Yay! All right. Thank you for putting up with me for this long. I know this has been a long video, but I'll see y'all later. Mwah!